Title: He walked out for bread and never came back. The loaf that went missing. They say in Houston, you can measure a man's troubles not by the size of his bank account, but by how far he'll walk for bread. Some men will drive 6 blocks, some will cross the city, and some will never come back at all. Now don't laugh just yet. You think it's funny? An old man telling you a story about a guy who went out for a loaf of bread. But I've lived long enough, 80 years worth of wrinkles, heartaches, mistakes, and quiet victories, to know this. The smallest errands often lead to the biggest tragedies. See, in Houston, crime doesn't always knock on the door. Sometimes it waits at the gas station. Sometimes it hides behind a neon sign at the corner store. And sometimes it starts with a man who told his wife, "Baby, I'll be back in 10 minutes." But let me tell you, he never came back. That night changed more than one family. It cracked open secrets buried under years of lies. It showed how temptation, greed, and desperation can turn the simplest thing, like buying bread, into the last walk of a man's life. I'll walk you through this story slow, because crime isn't just blood and bullets, it's choices. And choices always leave behind crumbs. Crumbs for folks like me to pick up and stitch into lessons for younger souls like you. Now lean in, listen close. This ain't just a crime story. This is a roadmap, a warning, and maybe, if you're wise enough, a reason to never underestimate the weight of an ordinary moment. And if you're new here on the Pulse of Truth, don't just listen and vanish like that man did. Stick around, subscribe. Because if 80 years of living have taught me one thing, it's this. The truth might hurt, but ignoring it costs a whole lot more. So, he walked out for bread, and what he found was death, betrayal, and a trail that still haunts Houston streets.
He said he'd only be gone for 5 minutes.
The errand that should have been simple. Houston, Texas. August evening. The sun was setting, dragging its orange belly across the skyline, and the heat was still clinging like an unwanted guest. Houston heat doesn't say goodbye politely. It hangs on your shirt, your skin, even your patience. Now meet Raymond Ray Jefferson, a man in his mid-40s. Average fella, nothing remarkable. He worked down at a warehouse that handled shipments from the port. The kind of man who had strong hands but a tired look in his eyes. The way a man looks when life has been serving him bills instead of blessings. Ray had a wife, Clara, a woman with a sharp tongue and a sharper eye. They had been married 15 years. Too long to be sweethearts, too short to give up on each other completely. And like most Houston couples living paycheck to paycheck, their evenings were a mix of arguments about bills, talk of kids' homework, and prayers that the car wouldn't break down on I-45 again. That evening, Clara was cooking beans and rice. Simple meal, nothing fancy. But Clara had one complaint. "Ray, we ain't got no bread. You know I can't serve this without bread. Go down to the corner store and get some. Don't take long now." A younger man might have grumbled. But Ray was older, tired, and had learned something most men learn too late. Sometimes it's easier to walk out than to argue. So Ray grabbed his wallet, slipped on his sandals, and muttered, "I'll be back in 10 minutes. 10 minutes, that was the promise. Now let me pause here, because in my 80 years, I've learned that most folks don't realize how fragile those everyday promises are. You think you got tomorrow, but tomorrow ain't promised. You think running down to the corner store is just a trip for bread, but sometimes it's a trip into the hands of fate. Ray walked out the door, and Clara, standing there with her wooden spoon, never imagined that was the last time she'd see him alive. The corner store was only 3 blocks away. A rundown little joint, neon sign flickering, groceries, cold beer, a TM inside. It wasn't the safest place after dark, but it wasn't the worst either. The kind of store where the cashier knows half the customers by name, but still keeps a baseball bat under the counter just in case. Now here's where the story bends, because while Ray was heading toward that store, so was trouble. Trouble in Houston don't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears desperation. Sometimes it carries a pistol that's been used too many times. That night, a young man named Marcus Green, barely 20, skinny as a broomstick, eyes darting like a stray dog, was pacing outside that same store. Marcus was no stranger to crime. He'd dipped into it like a man dips bread into soup. Easy, careless, hungry for more. He wasn't a hardened gangster, but he was desperate. And desperation will make the weakest man dangerous. Ray didn't know it, but he was walking into Marcus's bad decision. And here's where I stop you, my listener, because you might already be leaning back thinking, what's the big deal? Man goes to the store, man buys bread, but remember this, crime doesn't schedule appointments, it waits. It waits for tired men, late nights, and bad coincidences. Ray walked out for bread, and Houston was about to write his name into its crime stories. The corner store crossroads. The bell above the store door jingled as Ray pushed it open. You know that sound. Every corner store's got the same bell. A cheap little chime that don't sound like much, but I swear, it has a way of marking moments in history. People walk in broke, walk out with a lottery ticket worth millions. Others walk in alive, walk out in the back of an ambulance. That night, that bell was announcing Ray's final chapter. He just didn't know it. Inside, the air was cool, the kind of cool that feels good after Houston heat has been roasting you all day. The store smelled like a mix of fried chicken grease, stale chips, and pine sol. A radio in the back was playing Tejano music. Behind the counter stood Mr. Alvarez, the owner, short man, gray at the temples, who'd seen enough in his years to know when trouble was brewing. Ray nodded at him politely. Evening, Mr. Alvarez. Evening, Ray. Bread's on the back wall. It should have been simple. Bread, money on the counter, back home in 10 minutes. That's how life fools you, making you think it's predictable. But standing by the coolers near the back was Marcus. Hoodie pulled up despite the heat, hands deep in his pocket like he was holding more than just loose change. His eyes flicked up when Ray walked in. Not the look of a friendly neighbor. No, this was the look of a man trying to decide if tonight was worth risking everything. Ray noticed him but kept walking. See, Ray wasn't a man who liked confrontation. At 46, you learn a little wisdom. Sometimes the best fight is the one you never start. So he walked past Marcus, grabbed a loaf of Wonder Bread off the shelf, and made his way to the counter. Mr. Alvarez rang it up. $2.50. Ray pulled out a $5 bill, handed it over. And that's when Marcus made his move. Put it all in the bag, Marcus barked, voice shaky but loud enough to freeze the store. Mr. Alvarez looked up. Marcus had a pistol in his hand, pointed straight at him. The kind of pistol that's been dropped, traded, maybe even used before. A weapon with history, and now it was part of Ray's story too. Ray froze, bread still in his hand. His mind raced. He wasn't a hero, wasn't a fool either. He knew what guns could do. Houston had taught him that. Don't do this, son, Mr. Alvarez said calmly, his voice the kind you use when trying not to spook a wild animal. Marcus's hands shook. His eyes darted between Alvarez, the cash register, and Ray. I said, put it in the bag. Hurry up. Now let me tell you something. In 80 years, I've seen desperate men. You can smell desperation like gasoline. It spreads fast, and if one spark hits it, everything blows. Marcus wasn't a cold-blooded killer. He was scared, nervous, a kid who thought robbery was his ticket out of poverty. But scared men with guns are the deadliest kind. Ray knew that, and in that moment, he had a choice. Stay quiet, hand over the bread, and hope Marcus walked out without shooting. Or try to talk sense into him. And here's where wisdom and foolishness can sometimes look the same. Ray took a slow breath. Son, he said, his voice steady but calm. This ain't the way. You don't want this life. You pull that trigger, you don't just ruin his life, you ruin yours too. Marcus's eyes flickered. His lip trembled. He wasn't expecting anyone to talk to him like that. Most folks would have kept their heads down. But Ray, he was a man who'd seen enough to know that sometimes a word can stop a bullet, but not always. Marcus snapped back, waving the gun toward Ray. Shut up, old man, you don't know me. And that right there, that was the moment fate flipped the coin. A young man too scared to think straight, and an older man too stubborn to stay silent. Mr. Alvarez, sweating, shoved bills into a paper bag, trying to end this before it got worse. But worse was already standing in the room, and his name was Raymond Jefferson. Because Ray didn't just walk out for bread, he walked straight into Marcus's breaking point. Bread, bullets, and bad timing. The air inside the store thickened. You could almost hear the hum of the old refrigerator, the faint crackle of the radio in the back, and Marcus's ragged breathing. It was the kind of silence that presses down on a room right before something breaks. Ray held his loaf of bread, frozen in place. It felt heavier than it should have, like destiny had swapped out flour for bricks. "Faster, old man," Marcus barked, jerking the pistol toward Mr. Alvarez again. Alvarez's hands shook as he stuffed bills into the paper bag. He'd been robbed before. Anyone running a corner store in Houston long enough had. But this kid didn't look like the others. Most robbers came in hard, collected fast, and left faster. This one? He looked like he was fighting himself inside his own head. Ray, God bless him, tried again. "Son, look at you. You're shaking. You don't want to do this. This ain't who you are." Now let me pause. In 80 years, I've learned something most folks never figure out. Sometimes people don't want to be saved. They just want to be heard. Marcus wasn't pointing that gun because he was brave. He was pointing it because he was scared. And fear makes men deaf to reason. "Shut your mouth," Marcus snapped, whipping the gun toward Ray. That's when it happened. One slip of a finger. One pop too loud for such a small space. Bang! The gun went off. The bullet tore through the stale air of the corner store and found a home in Ray's chest. Ray's eyes went wide. The loaf of bread tumbled from his hands and hit the floor with a soft thud, absurdly gentle compared to the violence that had just erupted. Clara, back home, had just stirred the beans on the stove. She thought she was making dinner for two. She didn't know her husband's last meal would be unfinished. Ray staggered back, gasping, eyes flicking from Marcus to Mr. Alvarez. He looked more surprised than scared, as if his mind couldn't quite grasp that a 10-minute bread run had ended this way. Marcus froze, gun still in his hand, his face pale. He hadn't planned to shoot. Most young men never do. They think waving a gun makes them powerful. But guns don't take orders. They speak for themselves. Aw, man, no," Marcus muttered, backing away. His hands trembled so badly the gun nearly slipped from his grip. Mr. Alvarez's heart pounded, but he knew this wasn't his moment to move. He lifted his hand slowly. "Listen, son. You need to leave. Right now. Walk out that door before it gets worse." But worse was already here. Ray, clutching his chest, slumped against the chip rack, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor. Blood soaked through his shirt, dark and spreading. His breath rattled. In his last clear moments, Ray whispered, not to Marcus, not to Alvarez, but to himself, maybe even to God. "I told her. 10 minutes. Then his head tilted, his chest rose once more, and he went still. The bread lay beside him on the dirty linoleum, a symbol too heavy for words. Marcus bolted. The bell above the door jingled again, same cheerful chime, but now it sounded cruel. He disappeared into the Houston night, clutching nothing but the weight of what he'd done. And just like that, a man who walked out for bread became another crime statistic. But don't you dare shrug it off. Behind every statistic is a story, and behind every story is a lesson. That night, the lesson was this: one choice, 1 second, can erase a lifetime of promises. The weight that turned to forever. Back at the Jefferson house, the beans were simmering low on the stove. The smell filled the kitchen, comfort food, the kind of meal that makes a family feel like everything's steady even when money's tight. Clara stirred the pot, muttering under her breath. Man takes forever for bread, probably standing there jawing with Alvarez about the Texans again. She checked the clock on the wall. 12 minutes, then 15. Now, I don't know if you've ever waited on someone you love, but I can tell you from 80 years of watching the world, waiting can feel like an iron chain around your chest. At first it's patience, then it's worry, then it's dread. Clara set the table. 2 plates, 2 forks, a habit, nothing more. She told herself he'd walk through that door any second, loaf of bread in hand, maybe even a joke about how bread's gone up $2, highway robbery. But the door stayed shut. By the 30-minute mark, Clara's irritation had shifted to unease. She walked to the window, peered out onto the street. Quiet. Just the hum of cicadas and a neighbor's dog barking in the distance. Then came the sound no spouse ever wants to hear. Police sirens, faint but growing, heading in the direction of the corner store. Clara froze. A chill ran up her spine. Houston had taught her long ago. Sirens meant somebody's night was about to be ruined. An hour passed before there was a knock at her door. Not the knock of a husband with bread. No, this was harder, heavier. The kind of knock that carries bad news in its knuckles. She opened it to find two Houston police officers standing there, hats in hand. "Ma'am," one began gently. "Are you Mrs. Clara Jefferson?" Her throat went dry. She nodded. "I'm sorry to have to tell you, your husband, Raymond Jefferson, was involved in an incident at Alvarez's store. He didn't make it." Now, there are no words heavy enough to describe what happens inside a person when they hear news like that. It's like time cracks open. Everything falls silent except the pounding of your own heart. Clara gripped the door frame, her knees threatening to buckle. No, you got the wrong man. Ray just went for bread. Just bread." But the look in the officer's eyes told her the truth. She didn't scream, didn't collapse. Instead, she walked back into her kitchen, stared at the pot of beans still bubbling on the stove, and whispered, "I told him not to take long." Dinner for two had just become dinner for one. The officers gave her space, said they'd be in touch. Words like investigation and robbery floated in the air, but Clara barely heard them. Her whole world had been cut in half with one gunshot in a corner store 3 blocks away. Meanwhile, back at the store, detectives were already collecting evidence. Yellow tape went up, cameras clicked, reporters circled like vultures. Mr. Alvarez sat on the curb, head in his hands. He told them everything. The bread, the young man, the trembling hands, the gunshot. And somewhere in the shadows of Houston, Marcus was running. Running not just from the police, but from the weight of what he'd done. Now listen to me close, my friend. This is where crime's true damage shows. It doesn't just take a life. It leaves holes in families, scars in neighborhoods, and regrets that no prison sentence can heal. Ray walked out for bread. Clara waited with dinner. And Houston got another tragedy to add to its long list. The fugitive with shaky hands. Marcus ran like a man with fire on his heels. The streets of Houston blurred. Streetlights, neon signs, passing cars. None of it mattered. His breath came fast, his chest burning, his sneakers slapping the pavement as if the sound alone could drown out what had just happened. But no matter how fast he ran, he couldn't outrun the image of Ray collapsing in front of him, bread slipping to the floor like some cruel punchline. Marcus ducked into an alley, leaned against a wall, and tried to catch his breath. His hands were still trembling so bad he nearly dropped the pistol. He shoved it into his hoodie pocket, as if burying it could erase the fact it had just stolen a man's life. "Think, man. Think," he muttered to himself. But thinking wasn't Marcus's strong suit. He was 20 years old, raised in a rough part of Houston, bouncing between relatives, schools, and street corners. The streets had taught him one lesson: money talks, and hunger doesn't wait. That night, hunger and desperation had pushed him through Alvarez's door. Now blood was on his hands, and the city was about to push back. Marcus's first thought was family. His cousin Darnell had a small apartment on the north side, the kind of place where police cruisers slowed down, but never stopped long enough to clean it up. If anyone could hide him, it'd be Darnell. So Marcus hopped a bus, head down, heart racing every time a cop car passed. He pressed himself against the window, hoodie pulled tight, praying no one recognized him. Meanwhile, Houston PD was already moving. Surveillance cameras had caught Marcus's face. Witnesses described him. His name wasn't on the news yet, but it was only a matter of time. When Marcus reached Darnell's apartment, he banged on the door like the devil was chasing him. Darnell opened it, bleary-eyed, holding a beer. "Boy, what you doing here this late?" Marcus pushed past him, pacing the living room. "Cuz, I messed up. I messed up bad." Darnell frowned. "What you mean?" Marcus swallowed hard. I tried to hit the corner store, Alvarez's spot. This old dude, he was just standing there. I didn't mean to shoot him. It just went off. Darnell dropped his beer, the bottle shattering on the floor. You fool! You shot somebody? Marcus nodded, eyes wide. I ain't mean it. I swear I ain't mean it. But he's dead, man. He's dead, and now the cops... Shut up, Darnell hissed, grabbing him by the shoulders. You don't say that out loud in my house. You trying to get me locked up too? Marcus's chest heaved. What do I do? What do I do, man? Darnell looked at him long and hard. In that moment, he wasn't just looking at his cousin. He was looking at a dead man walking. Because in Houston, you don't shoot an innocent man in a neighborhood store and get away clean. The city has a way of dragging you back. You gotta lay low, Darnell finally said. Ain't no fixing this. Best thing you can do is stay here, keep quiet, and pray they don't knock down my door tomorrow. But prayer wasn't going to be enough. Marcus had crossed a line you can't uncross. And while he sat on Darnell's torn-up couch, hands still shaking, somewhere across town, Clara Jefferson was sitting alone at her kitchen table, staring at 2 untouched plates of beans and rice. Now here's a little wisdom for you. Running don't erase what you've done. It just delays the bill. And trust me, the bill always comes due. Marcus thought he was hiding. In truth, Houston was already hunting him. The city that doesn't forget, by dawn, Houston already knew. The story spread like smoke. Man killed in corner store robbery on the East End. Suspect fled on foot, radio stations ran it between traffic updates. News anchors put on their solemn voices, shaking their heads for the cameras. Neighbors whispered it on front porches. Another tragedy, another headline, another reminder that Houston streets could swallow you in broad daylight or under a flickering neon sign. At HPD headquarters, Detective Samuel Sam Torres sat at his desk, coffee in one hand, file folder in the other. Sam was a veteran, mid-50s, graying hair, eyes that had seen too much but still burned with the stubbornness of a man who believed in justice, even if it limped behind. He flipped through the witness reports. Alvarez had described the shooter, young, skinny, jittery, maybe 20. Surveillance cameras caught a blurry face, hoodie up, but it was enough to run through the system. Sam leaned back, rubbing his temples. Another kid with a gun, another family torn apart over pocket change. His partner, Detective Linda Graves, leaned on the desk, sipping her coffee black. She was younger than Sam, sharper, known for connecting dots faster than most. We'll get him. Alvarez is solid. Cameras gave us enough. Somebody on the streets knows his name. And she was right, because Houston has a funny way of talking. You can try to hide, but the city's gossip moves faster than the freeway at 2 a.m. Somebody always sees, always hears, always snitches. By noon, an anonymous tip had already come in. Sounds like Marcus Green, kid from 5th Ward. Been running with the wrong crowd. Sam circled the name on the whiteboard. Marcus Green. Let's see how far he thinks he can run. Meanwhile, in Clara's house, grief was settling in like an unwanted guest. The kitchen table still had 2 plates on it, but now they were cold, untouched, a reminder of what never happened. Family members had started arriving, whispering prayers, offering hugs that couldn't fill the empty space in the room. Clara sat quiet, her eyes swollen from tears, staring at the bread Ray never brought home. You know what hurts the most? She whispered to her sister. It wasn't even about money or revenge or nothing big. My Ray died over bread. Bread, for God's sake. Her sister squeezed her hand, but there are no words for that kind of pain. Back across town, Marcus was pacing Darnell's living room like a caged animal. Every siren that wailed in the distance made him jump. Every knock on the wall from the neighbor made his heart race. They gonna find me, man, Marcus muttered, sweating through his hoodie. I can feel it. They already know. Darnell shook his head. You should have just took the money and left. But no, you had to go and pull that trigger. You ain't cut out for this life, Marcus. Never was Marcus stopped pacing, anger flashing in his eyes. I didn't mean to. I ain't no killer. But here's the truth, son. The moment that bullet left the barrel, Marcus became one. Whether he meant it or not, intentions don't erase outcomes. And now the detectives had a name. The city had a story, and Marcus Green was about to learn that Houston doesn't forget. The Net Titans detective Sam Torres stood outside Alvarez's corner store the next morning, squinting at the yellow tape still fluttering in the humid Houston breeze. The sidewalk had been hosed down, but faint stains still marked the spot where Ray Jefferson's blood had spread. Sam knelt down, tracing the outline in his mind. Middle of the floor, chip rack behind him. This wasn't planned. Kid panicked and Detective Graves flipped through her notepad. Alvarez says he tried talking the kid down. That's when the gun went off Sam's side. Always the same story. Kids think they're holding power, but really it's fear holding them. Fear pulls the trigger every time inside the store. Alvarez was restocking shelves with slow, heavy movements. The man looked 10 years older overnight. He told the detectives everything again. Marcus's nervous hands, the trembling voice, the moment Ray tried to reason with him. I knew Ray, Alvarez said softly, shaking his head. Good man. Never caused trouble. He just wanted bread. Sam closed his notebook. We'll find the kid. Across town, Clara sat in her living room, still in yesterday's clothes. Family photos lined the mantel. Ray holding their niece at a birthday party. Ray grilling in the backyard. Ray in a church suit, smiling like life hadn't beaten him down yet. The detectives arrived mid-morning. Clara opened the door, eyes red but sharp. Mrs. Jefferson? Torres asked gently. She nodded. You here to tell me why my husband ain't coming home? Torres and Graves exchanged a glance. They'd done this dance too many times, but it never got easier. We're working on it, Graves said. We have a suspect. Young man, Marcus Green. We're doing everything we can to bring him in. Clara crossed her arms. Suspect? You already know his name, don't you? Then don't call him a suspect. Call him what he is. A killer. Torres respected that fire. Yes, ma'am. But the law's gotta move step by step. We'll get him. That I promise you, Clara's lips trembled. Promise. That's what Ray said when he walked out my door. 10 minutes, he said. That was his promise. And now I'm burying him. The detective stood quiet. Sometimes silence is the only thing you can offer the grieving. Meanwhile, Marcus was unraveling. He sat hunched on Darnell's couch, chain-smoking cheap cigarettes, eyes darting to the window every time a car passed. They're coming, man. I know they're coming. Darnell poured himself a drink, shaking his head. You brought this on yourself. You think the city just gonna forget you shot a man? They already got your face on every screen in Houston. Marcus grabbed the remote, flipped on the TV. Sure enough, his blurry surveillance photo flashed on the evening news. Suspect in East End shooting, believed to be 20-year-old Marcus Green, armed and dangerous. His stomach dropped. They got me, man. I'm done, Darnell sighed, rubbing his temples. You better figure out your next move before they figure it out for you. But Marcus didn't have a next move. Desperation had driven him to the store, and now desperation was about to drive him straight into the arms of the law. Because here's the thing, when the net tightens, the fish don't swim smarter. They thrash, and that's what gets them caught. Marcus was thrashing already. The first mistake. For a day, Marcus stayed holed up in Darnell's cramped apartment, curtains drawn tight, air thick with cigarette smoke. He barely ate, barely slept, jumping at every sound outside. But fear has a way of pushing men into stupidity, and stupid men make mistakes. By the second night, Marcus's nerves were shot. He couldn't sit still anymore. He needed air, needed food, needed something to quiet the pounding in his head. "Cuz," he said, pacing, "I just gotta step out for a minute. Grab something to eat. Nobody gonna notice me." Darnell nearly choked on his drink. "Are you crazy? They got your face on every news station in Houston. You walk out there, you might as well put handcuffs on yourself." But Marcus was restless, jittery. "I'll keep my hood up. I'll be quick." And that was mistake number one. Marcus slipped out just after midnight, hoodie pulled tight, head down. He walked 2 blocks to a shabby little gas station, the kind that sold fried chicken wings, microwavable burritos, and stale coffee that tasted like regret. He grabbed chips and a soda, slapped a crumpled $10 bill on the counter, and muttered, "Keep the change." The cashier squinted at him. Something about the way the kid avoided eye contact, the way his hands shook. Something felt off. And Houston cashiers, they see everything. As Marcus hurried out the door, the cashier leaned over to the other clerk and whispered, "Ain't that the kid from the news? The one shot that man over on the East End?" The clerk nodded. "Looks just like him." 5 minutes later, HPD had another anonymous tip. Marcus Green spotted near Polk Street, gas station on the corner. Back at Darnell's apartment, Marcus tore into the chips like he hadn't eaten in days. "See? Told you I'd be fine," he said between mouthfuls, crumbs spraying everywhere. Darnell shook his head. "Boy, you just painted a target on this place. You think people don't talk? Houston loves to talk. Somebody's seen you, and now it's only a matter of time before the cops come knocking." Marcus's chewing slowed. The realization hit him hard. "You think they know already?" Darnell didn't answer. He didn't have to. Meanwhile, in an unmarked car parked near the gas station, Detectives Torres and Graves were already piecing it together. The cashier's description matched. The grainy security footage showed the same hoodie, the same build. Torres lit a cigarette, exhaling slow. Kid can't help himself. Fear makes them sloppy. Graves nodded. "We keep circling that neighborhood. Won't be long before he slips again." Torres flicked ash out the window. "He already did. Question is, does he come out shooting next time or running?" And that right there is the truth about fugitives. They always think they're hiding, when really they're just waiting to be found. Marcus's first mistake had already written the next chapter for him. Closing circles and open graves. By Friday morning, Houston police had their eyes fixed on one address, a cramped two-bedroom apartment in the north side, leased to a man named Darnell Green. Detective Torres stood with his hands on his hips, staring at the dossier on his desk. Cousin, always a cousin, a friend, or some woman's couch. These kids don't hide in shadows. They hide in family. Detective Graves tapped a photo clipped to the folder. "We got 2 sightings of Marcus within 3 blocks of this place. Gas station clerk, surveillance footage, plus an anonymous tip. That's enough smoke for us to believe there's fire?" Torres nodded. "We move careful. Cornered kids don't think, they shoot." Meanwhile, Clara Jefferson sat in a funeral home 2 neighborhoods away, the scent of lilies clinging to the air. She stared blankly at a polished casket catalog spread open before her. The funeral director, all rehearsed sympathy and quiet voice, pointed at pictures of wood finishes. "This oak model is dignified, ma'am. The mahogany, well, that's our premium selection." Clara didn't hear him. She was stuck on one thought. My Ray went out for bread, and now they're selling me boxes to put him in. Her sister nudged her gently. "Clara, honey, you gotta pick something. They need to prepare for Saturday." Clara blinked, tears threatening but not falling. "He promised me 10 minutes. 10 minutes. I didn't even get 10. The funeral director shifted uncomfortably, not knowing what to say. He'd arranged hundreds of funerals, but grief like this, it had no script. Back at Darnell's apartment, Marcus was unraveling fast. He sat at the kitchen table, hoodie still up, though the air was thick and stale. His leg bounced under the table, his eyes darting at every car that passed outside the window. "Cuz," Darnell said, setting down his glass, "you need to think. They know it's you. You stay here. You drag me down too. You can't keep hiding." Marcus's voice cracked. "Where I'm supposed to go? They got my face everywhere. I can't walk down the street without somebody whispering. That's what happens when you kill a man," Darnell snapped. "Don't matter if it was an accident. Ain't no erasing it." Marcus slammed his fist on the table, sending a spoon clattering to the floor. I told you, I didn't mean it." He started talking, and my hand just, "Save it for the judge," Darnell muttered. That afternoon, Torres and Graves drove slowly down Darnell's block in an unmarked sedan. They didn't stop. They didn't need to. Not yet. They were letting Marcus cook in his own fear, waiting for him to slip again. Graves sipped her coffee, eyes scanning the row of old apartments. "You think he's in there right now?" Torres nodded. "I'd bet my pension, but we don't rush. We let him sweat." Pressure makes cracks. Cracks make openings. Graves leaned back. He's just a kid. Torres exhaled smoke from his cigarette, shaking his head. A kid with a gun who put a good man in the ground. Age don't matter when you pull the trigger, and across town, Clara finally chose the casket. Oak, simple, because Ray wasn't a fancy man. He was just a husband who went out for bread and never came back. The world kept turning. Houston traffic still jammed up on I-45, restaurants still filled with laughter, radios still played music. But for Clara, for her family, time had split in two, before the bread run and after. And for Marcus, time was running out. The funeral and the hunt, Saturday morning broke humid and heavy, the kind of Houston air that clings to your lungs. The church on Lyons Avenue filled slowly. Neighbors, co-workers, family, and strangers who had only seen Ray Jefferson's name on the news but came to show respect. The casket, oak and modest, sat at the front beneath a spray of white lilies. Clara stood stiff in a black dress, her hands clasped tight enough to leave nail marks in her palms. The pastor spoke of life, of God's will, of justice yet to come. But Clara didn't hear much. She was staring at the casket, whispering words no one else could hear. "You said 10 minutes, Ray." "Just 10. Her niece clutched her hand. Her brother put an arm around her shoulders. But grief is a solitary storm. You drown in it alone, even when surrounded. Meanwhile, just 12 miles away, Marcus sat on the edge of Darnell's couch, sweat dripping down his temple, despite the weak air conditioner rattling in the window. The TV blared the funeral coverage. Local news cameras had shown up outside the church. Clara's tear-streaked face filled the screen for a moment. Marcus flinched, muttering, "I didn't mean for none of this." He grabbed the remote and switched it off, pacing the room. Darnell poured another drink. "You think the world cares if you meant it or not? That woman's burying her husband right now. That's the only truth people see." Marcus's hands shook as he pulled at his hoodie strings. "I gotta get out of Houston, tonight." Before they come, Darnell looked at him hard. "And how you plan to do that? Walk to Dallas? Swim to Mexico?" But Marcus wasn't listening. Panic had already driven him past reason. At the funeral, the service ended with a slow hymn. The pallbearers, Ray's cousins and childhood friends, lifted the casket and carried it out into the sweltering sun. The crowd followed, a procession of bowed heads and hushed voices. Clara walked behind the casket. Her steps small, her eyes fixed forward, the sound of church bells mixed with the low rumble of cars passing on the street. Houston didn't pause. Life went on. But for Clara, every sound was an insult. At the graveside, as the casket was lowered, she finally broke. Her knees buckled, and her family caught her before she fell. The wail that tore from her chest silenced the murmuring crowd. It was the sound of a promise broken forever. That same afternoon, Torres and Graves sat in an unmarked car, watching Darnell's apartment from half a block away. "He hasn't left," Graves said, eyes never leaving the window. Torres nodded. "Good. The longer he sits, the sloppier he'll get." "We'll move before dawn tomorrow," Graves glanced at him. "You really think he'll come quietly?" Torres flicked ash out the window. "No fugitive ever comes quietly. But one way or another, he's coming." And with that, the circle was nearly closed. A man buried, a widow grieving, and a boy with nowhere left to run. Because that's the lesson, son. The grave always gets filled, and the cell always gets locked. The only question is, who's first? Flight before dawn. The city of Houston never truly sleeps. Traffic hums on the freeways, sirens echo in the distance, and late-night diners keep coffee pots burning. But in the hours before dawn, the city grows quieter. Shadows stretch long, and desperate men think desperate thoughts. Marcus sat on the couch chewing his nails raw. The funeral coverage replayed on the late-night news. Clara's tear-streaked face, the casket lowering into the earth. He couldn't look at it. He switched the TV off and muttered, "I can't stay here. They're gonna find me. I gotta move." Darnell rubbed his forehead. "Move where, Marcus? You think you Houdini? Whole city looking for you?" Marcus's voice was ragged. "I got a cousin in Port Arthur. He'll hide me. I just gotta make it out of Houston tonight." Darnell slammed his glass on the table. "Boy, you don't get it, do you? You leave this place, you're gonna stick out like a firecracker on Sunday morning. HPD already circling. You run, they chase. You stay, maybe you got a chance to lawyer up. But Marcus wasn't hearing it. Panic had already made the decision for him. Across the street, Detectives Torres and Graves sat in the unmarked sedan, sipping gas station coffee gone lukewarm. The street was quiet, but both detectives felt it, the weight of something about to break. "He's not gonna sit forever," Torres muttered. "The longer he stews, the more he'll want to move." Graves adjusted her earpiece, listening to the quiet radio chatter from backup units stationed around the block. "That's when we take him," Torres nodded. "Exactly. Rats always try to run before dawn. Something about that hour makes them think they can slip away." Inside the apartment, Marcus pulled a small backpack from under the bed. He stuffed in a few clothes, the last of Darnell's cash, and the pistol he should have thrown away but couldn't. Darnell watched him with weary eyes. "You leave with that gun, Marcus. You're asking to die with it." Marcus zipped the bag. "I ain't dying." Not tonight, but outside, HPD had already set their net. Patrol cars waited 2 blocks away, engines idling. Officers crouched in the dark, radios clipped to their vests. Torres and Graves had drawn the map, and Marcus was right in the center of it. The city was holding its breath, and when Marcus opened that apartment door, the chase would finally begin. The chase begins. At 3:47 a.m., Marcus twisted the knob of Darnell's apartment door, every muscle in his body tight with fear. The hallway outside was dim, lit only by a flickering bulb. He adjusted the hood over his head, slung the backpack on his shoulder, and whispered, "I'll be gone before they even know." Darnell leaned back on the couch, shaking his head. "Boy, you don't know they already know. You're walking into a snare." But Marcus didn't answer. He stepped into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind him. Across the street, Detective Torres straightened in his seat. Movement. Door just opened. Graves lifted her binoculars. "It's him!" Backpack. Hood up, Torres keyed his radio. "All units, he's on the move." "Keep it quiet until he's outside the perimeter." The trap was alive now. Radios crackled softly. Shadowed figures shifted in position. The street seemed to tense along with the officers. Marcus descended the stairs 2 at a time, heart pounding, every sound magnified, the creak of the railing, the echo of his sneakers on concrete. He pushed through the apartment complex gate and slipped onto the sidewalk. The night air hit him, sticky with humidity, and for a moment he thought maybe he'd pulled it off. He started walking fast toward the busier streets, thinking if he could just catch a ride south, he'd be out of Houston before daylight. But nerves betrayed him. He kept glancing over his shoulder, hoodie tugged low, his pace shifting from fast walk to near jog. That's what drew the first cruiser's eyes. "Unit 4, visual confirmed," came the whisper over Torres's radio. Marcus turned onto Polk Street, picking up speed. That's when he saw the headlights. Too steady, too slow, tracking him. Panic surged and he bolted into a run. "Suspect is running," Graves called. "Southbound on Polk." The quiet watch shattered into noise. Sirens wailed to life. Doors slammed. Boots hit pavement. Marcus tore through the streets, his backpack bouncing, sweat stinging his eyes. His lungs burned, but fear kept his legs moving. He darted down an alley, hurdled a trash can, cut across a vacant lot. But Houston is a big city with narrow corners, and HPD knew these streets better than him. Every block he ran, the net tightened. Every breath he took, the circle closed. Torres followed in the unmarked car, eyes steady on the fleeing figure. He muttered under his breath, "Keep running, kid." The streets only end one way, because that's the truth about a chase. A man can outrun the police for a block, a mile, maybe an hour, but he can't outrun the weight of what he's done, and Marcus was about to find that out the hard way. Shadows and sirens. Marcus sprinted down the alley, lungs burning, shoes slapping against cracked pavement. His backpack dragged at his shoulders, the pistol inside banging against his ribs with every stride. Behind him, sirens screamed and voices barked through radios. The city wasn't just awake now, it was chasing him. He cut left, ducking between 2 warehouses, and pressed himself against a graffiti-tagged wall. Sweat poured down his face, soaking into the hood of his sweatshirt. He forced himself to breathe quiet, even though his chest felt like it might cave in. For a moment, the world shrank to silence. Just the sound of his pulse hammering in his ears. Maybe they'd lost him. Maybe. Across the street, Detective Graves crouched beside a patrol car, listening to the static crackle on her radio. "Unit 6, anything?" A voice came back. "Negative. Last sighting was near Polk and Dumble. He's on foot." Torres exhaled smoke from yet another cigarette, scanning the dark alleyways. "He's close. Rats don't run straight, they scurry. He's hiding somewhere in shouting distance." He pointed to the warehouses. "Start sweeping, slow. Force him to move." Marcus peeked around the corner, heart pounding. A spotlight from a cruiser swept across the wall just feet from his hiding spot. He pressed back, holding his breath, praying the beam would pass. It did, but the relief didn't last. A radio crackled close by. Boots crunched gravel. An officer's voice called, "Marcus Green! Come out with your hands up." Marcus's stomach twisted. They knew. They weren't guessing anymore. They knew. He slipped deeper between the warehouses, finding a broken fence, and shoved himself through, scraping his arm raw on the jagged metal. On the other side, he stumbled into a vacant lot choked with weeds and rusted-out cars. The sirens grew louder again, bouncing off the walls, closing from every direction. Torres flicked his cigarette to the ground, crushing it under his heel. "He's moving. I can feel it." Graves scanned the lot with her flashlight, her jaw tight. "We're driving him into a corner." Torres nodded. "Exactly where we want him." Marcus crouched behind a rusted sedan, clutching his backpack tight. His breath came in shallow gasps, eyes darting like a trapped animal. He whispered to himself, "I ain't going back. I ain't going back." But deep down, he already knew. He wasn't going forward either. Because here's the lesson. When the whole city's looking for you, there's nowhere to hide but the truth. And the truth was about to find Marcus. The gun in the dark, Marcus crouched behind the rusted sedan, chest heaving, sweat stinging his eyes. The sirens wailed closer, bouncing off the warehouse walls until it felt like the whole city was screaming at him. He unzipped his backpack with shaking hands and pulled out the pistol. The metal felt heavy, colder than the night air, like it was judging him. His whisper came ragged. "I ain't going in." Not in no cuffs. Across the lot, Torres and Graves moved in careful steps, flashlights slicing through the weeds and shadows. Other officers fanned out, radios buzzing with clipped updates. "Check behind the cars," Graves said. Torres nodded, keeping his voice low. "Easy now. He's cornered. A cornered kid with a gun is a storm." Marcus peeked out from his hiding spot, saw the beams of light cutting closer, and panic exploded inside him. His finger twitched on the trigger. The memory of Ray Jefferson's shocked face flashed across his mind. The moment the gun went off in the corner store, the bread still in the man's hand. Marcus shook his head violently, muttering, "Not again! Not again!" But his grip tightened anyway. An officer's flashlight swept directly across the sedan. "Got movement!" Shouts erupted. "Hands up!" Marcus Green, hands up now! Marcus's ears rang. His body wanted to freeze, but his fear wanted to fire. He raised the pistol halfway, torn between surrender and suicide by cop. Torres stepped forward, voice steady but hard. "Marcus, don't do it. Put the gun down. You pull that trigger, your life ends right here." Graves added sharper, "This is your last chance. Drop it." For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Officers with guns raised, Marcus trembling in the shadows. Houston's humid air thick enough to choke. And in that frozen second, Marcus's future balanced on the weight of his trigger finger. Because here's the truth. When you carry a gun into fear, you don't control it. It controls you. One shot too many. The lot fell silent except for the pounding of Marcus's heart and the hum of distant sirens. Flashlights danced across the rusted cars, each beam locking him tighter into the spotlight. "Marcus Green!" Torres's voice cut through the night. "Last chance, drop the weapon!" Marcus's hand shook violently. His mind screamed two words over and over, "Not prison." And then it happened. His finger jerked. The gun barked once, the sound exploding against the walls like a bomb. The bullet didn't hit anyone. It buried itself in the hood of a junked car. But the shot tore away any chance of surrender. Instantly, officers shouted, "Shots fired!" A storm of red and blue lights surged forward, the air alive with shouts and the metallic click of safeties snapping off. Marcus bolted, sprinting deeper into the vacant lot, weaving between cars. Bullets didn't chase him, yet, but orders did. "Don't lose him! Watch your fire! Contain him!" Torres ran after him, lungs steady despite his age, his voice like iron. "Marcus! Every step you take is another nail in your coffin. Stop running!" But Marcus didn't stop. He couldn't. His fear was louder than Torres's warnings. He ducked through a broken fence, stumbling into another alley, the pistol still clutched tight. Sweat poured down his face, blurring his vision, his breath ragged like he was drowning on land. He could hear boots pounding behind him, radios buzzing, cars screeching to cut off escape routes. He fired another shot over his shoulder, wild, blind. The bullet sparked off a wall, but it didn't matter. The echo was enough to harden every officer's resolve. Graves shouted into her radio, "Suspect is armed and firing!" Lock the perimeter tight. For a brief second, Marcus ducked into a doorway, pressing his back to the wall, chest heaving. He could taste blood in his throat from running. He whispered almost to himself, "I didn't mean it. I didn't mean none of this." But the city didn't care about intentions. Houston only cared about actions. And Marcus's actions had just written the end of his story in gunpowder and fear. Because here's the lesson. Clear as a church bell in the dark. One shot can take a life, but it can also erase your own. Marcus had pulled the trigger twice now. The third time wouldn't end with a miss. The last corner. Marcus staggered down the alley, lungs tearing at him with every breath. His legs felt like lead, but fear pushed them forward. The pistol in his hand was slick with sweat, heavier with every step, as if it knew what was coming. He burst out of the alley and found himself in a dead end. 3-story brick walls towering above him, dumpsters stacked to one side, chain-link fencing on the other. No exits, no escape. For the first time all night, Marcus stopped running. The officers closed in, their boots pounding rhythmically like a drumbeat of inevitability. Floodlights from cruisers lit the walls bright as day, shadows vanishing. Torres stepped forward, his voice steady but loud enough to cut through the chaos. "It's over, Marcus. Drop the gun. Don't make your mama bury you next." Graves flanked left, her service weapon raised but her voice softer. "Marcus, look at me. You're 20 years old. You still breathing. You still got a chance, if you put it down." Marcus's chest heaved. He looked at the pistol, then at the circle of officers around him. Images flooded his mind. Ray Jefferson's face when the shot rang out. Clara's picture on the news. Darnell shaking his head, saying, "You don't get it, do you?" He raised the gun halfway, his hand trembling like a leaf in a storm. His voice cracked. "I ain't going to prison." "I ain't," Torres's voice thundered back, hard as steel. "You pull that trigger, Marcus. You don't go to prison. You go to the morgue." For a breathless moment, the whole world froze. Officers' fingers tightened on triggers. Radios went silent. The humid Houston air held everything still. And then, Marcus's arm faltered. His strength broke. The pistol clattered to the ground, the sound echoing like a verdict. Marcus dropped to his knees, sobbing, hands on his head. Officers rushed forward, cuffing him, securing the scene. But Torres just stood there, staring, a weary sadness in his eyes. "Kid," he muttered.
Almost to himself, "You were 60 seconds from being a name on a headstone." 60 seconds. As they hauled Marcus to his feet, Clara Jefferson sat awake at her kitchen table across town, staring at a photo of her husband. She didn't know yet that her husband's killer had been caught. She only knew the silence of her house, the ache of an empty chair. And that's the cruel balance of crime. Justice can catch the guilty, but it can't bring back the bread a man went out to buy. Aftermath. The Harris County Jail was never quiet. Doors clanged, voices echoed down concrete halls, and The hum of fluorescent lights made the nights feel endless. Marcus sat in his cell, orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his wiry frame. His hands fidgeted, constantly, as if they couldn't forget the weight of the pistol that once sat there. Every now and then, he whispered to himself, "I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it." But the walls never answered. He had an arraignment in a week. His public defender would argue circumstances, panic, youth. But Marcus knew deep down, none of that erased the fact that a man went out for bread and never came back. Across town, Clara Jefferson sat in her quiet house. The funeral flowers were starting to wilt, the food brought by neighbors growing stale on the counter. She sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair across from her. That was Ray's spot. He'd drink his coffee there, read the paper, sometimes hum a tune under his breath. Now it was just a chair. Her sister urged her to rest, but Clara shook her head. How do you rest when the world stole your heartbeat? The news said police caught the suspect. Clara didn't even celebrate. She just whispered to Ray's photo, "They got him, baby, but they didn't give me you back." Detectives Torres and Graves sat in their squad car 2 nights later, the city lights of Houston sprawling before them. Graves sipped her coffee, her eyes heavy. Another one off the streets. You'd think it'd feel like a win.
Torres lit a cigarette, smoke curling from his lips. Doesn't feel like a win when the Graves already filled. Feels like we're always 2 steps late. Graves glanced at him. Think the kid'll get life? Torres shook his head. Don't matter what he gets. His life ended the second he pulled that trigger. Same as Ray's ended when he went for bread. He stared out at the city, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Funny thing, Graves. I've been doing this job near 30 years. And the older I get, the more I realize it ain't the criminals that haunt me. It's the promises. Promises like, 10 minutes, I'll be back. Graves didn't reply. She didn't need to. Some silences speak loud enough. And that's the truth, son. A single act of panic can write the rest of your story in iron bars and gravestones. Houston would move on, but for Clara, for Marcus, for everyone who touched this tragedy, time had split. Before bread, after bread, and nothing would ever be the same. The trial begins. The Harris County Courthouse buzzed with a strange mix of silence and chatter. Reporters gathered outside, microphones ready, their voices carrying into the humid Houston air. Inside, the courtroom was cold, almost clinical. The polished wood benches gleamed under fluorescent lights, and the faint smell of disinfectant mixed with the perfume of lawyers and the sweat of anxious spectators. Marcus Green shuffled into the room, hands cuffed, orange jumpsuit exchanged for an ill-fitted suit provided by his attorney. He looked smaller now, his swagger gone, his eyes darting like a boycott sneaking out past curfew. But this wasn't curfew. This was murder. Clara Jefferson sat in the front row of the gallery, her sister beside her for strength. Her face carried both sorrow and iron resolve. She wanted answers, maybe closure, though deep down, she knew no sentence could balance the scale. When Marcus entered, Clara's eyes locked on him. For a brief moment, Marcus glanced her way. He froze, seeing the widow of the man he'd killed, the pain carved into her face. He quickly looked down, ashamed. The prosecutor, a sharp-tongued woman named Denise Alvarez, opened strong. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, pacing slowly. "This is not a case of a hardened criminal. This is not a case of an evil mastermind. This is a case of panic, of recklessness, and of choices that cannot be undone." Marcus Green pulled the trigger. And because of that, Raymond Jefferson, a husband, a provider, a man who walked out one evening for bread, never came home. Her words echoed in the courtroom. Clara bowed her head. The defense attorney, Harold Bennett, tried his best to paint Marcus as a frightened kid. Marcus Green is 20 years old. He was scared. He had no intent to kill. He fired in panic, not malice. This is not murder. It is tragedy born of fear. But Torres, sitting quietly at the back of the courtroom, shook his head. Fear didn't bring Jefferson back. The witnesses came one by one. The clerk from the convenience store, voice trembling, describing the gunshot. Detectives Graves and Torres, laying out the chase, the arrest, the warnings ignored. And finally, Clara, her voice steady but soft, telling the jury about the man she lost. She ended her testimony with a single line. Ray promised me he'd be back in 10 minutes. That was the last promise he ever broke. The courtroom was silent. Even Marcus's attorney lowered his head. For Marcus, every word was a hammer driving nails into a coffin he had built himself. The jury didn't just hear facts. They felt the weight of loss, the cost of panic, the finality of pulling a trigger. And in that courtroom, Houston learned again what Torres already knew. Justice punishes, but it never heals. The verdict. The jury room was a world apart from the courtroom. No microphones, no gavel, no public eyes. Just 12 ordinary Houstonians, sweating under the weight of a young man's future. The evidence was clear. The testimonies were heavy. The defense begged mercy, but the prosecution had painted a picture no one could ignore. Kid or not, one juror said, tapping the table. He pulled the trigger. Twice. A man's dead. That. Don't go away. Another sighed. Yeah, but he's only 20. His whole life ahead. Prison'll eat him alive. A third shook her head firmly. Ray Jefferson had a life ahead too. Bread and coffee and mornings with his wife. Now she's alone. Fair's fair. The deliberation wasn't about guilt. That was unanimous. It was about time. How many years? Should panic cost? Back in the courtroom, Marcus sat trembling. His attorney whispered, "Stay calm. Whatever happens, we'll appeal." Clara sat in the front row, hands folded tight, silent prayer on her lips. Torres and Graves leaned against the back wall, seasoned eyes bracing for yet another verdict. The bailiff called out, "All rise." The jury filed in, faces grave, the air thick with finality. The foreman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus Green, guilty of murder in the second degree." Marcus's knees nearly buckled. His attorney grabbed his arm. The judge's voice was steady. "Marcus Green, for the crime of murder in the second degree. This court sentences you to 40 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Marcus buried his face in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Clara didn't cheer, didn't smile. She only whispered, "40 years, Ray. But I've got a lifetime. Without you." Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed to Torres and Graves. "Detective Torres, what do you think of the sentence?" Torres lit a cigarette, eyes tired. 40 years don't balance a grave. But maybe, just maybe it'll stop the next kid from thinking a gun solves fear. Graves added quietly, "The lesson's simple. Choices echo longer than you think." Marcus walked out with a pistol. Ray walked out for bread. Only one came back. And that's the truth no verdict can hide. The law can punish the living, but it can't resurrect the dead. Echoes. Prison swallowed Marcus whole. The clang of metal doors, the shouts of inmates, the smell of sweat and disinfectant. Huntsville wasn't a place for boys. And yet, that's what Marcus still was. A boy with a man's sentence. His first nights were the hardest. He'd lie on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, the cries and curses of the cell block echoing in the dark. Sleep never came easy. When it did, it brought nightmares. Torres's voice shouting, Ray's wife crying, the pistol going off again and again. The older inmates looked at him and shook their heads. "Kid, you already lost your whole life. And you ain't even lived it yet." Marcus didn't answer. He just sat quiet, the weight of 40 years pressing down harder than the bars. Across Houston, Clara Jefferson tried to stitch her life back together. She returned to work at the library, though the silence of the stacks sometimes felt unbearable. Neighbors dropped by less often now. The sympathy meals had stopped. The visits had slowed. Everyone else's life moved on. Hers stayed in place. At night, she'd sit by the window, watching couples walk by hand in hand. She whispered to Ray's empty chair, "I'm still here, baby. Still waiting on that bread." Grief doesn't end with a verdict. It lingers, like perfume on an old coat. Detectives Torres and Graves kept working. Cases didn't stop because one had ended. But, some nights, Torres found himself driving past the Jefferson house, engine idling at the corner. He never went in, just looked at the porch light and thought of all the husbands who promised to be right back. Graves noticed. "You still carrying it?" she asked one night. Torres exhaled smoke into the humid air. "Every case sticks. Some just stick harder." The city of Houston moved on, as cities always do. The headlines faded. The TV crews found new stories, but for those touched by it, the phrase became a quiet, cautionary tale whispered in kitchens and barbershops. He walked out for bread and never came back. A reminder, a warning, a truth, because every choice echoes, and sometimes it echoes for generations. The weight of years. 15 years later, Marcus Green sat in the prison yard, his hair peppered with gray though he was barely past 35. The boy who once fired in panic was gone. In his place sat a man, hollowed by time. He worked in the prison laundry now, folding uniforms in silence. Most days, he barely spoke. Other inmates respected his quiet. Time had taught Marcus that loud mouths never lasted long. Sometimes, at night, he'd pull out a tattered Bible from the prison library. Not because he was holy, but because he needed words stronger than his own. On the inside cover, he had written one line. I didn't mean it, but meaning don't matter. Across Houston, Clara Jefferson's hair had gone silver. She moved slower now, arthritis stiffening her hands, but her eyes still carried the same fire. Every Sunday, she visited Ray's grave with fresh flowers. She never cried there anymore. Instead, she spoke to him like he was still beside her. Marcus is still in prison, she said one warm spring morning, brushing dust from the headstone. They tell me he's quiet. Maybe that's his punishment, to live long and remember. Me? I just keep living, Ray. For both of us. Her grief had softened with time, but it never disappeared. Grief doesn't leave, it just learns to sit quietly in the corner. Detective Torres was near retirement. His once black hair was white, his hands slower, but his mind still sharp. One evening, he sat with a group of young cadets at the academy, telling them stories over coffee. You'll think the badge makes you strong, he told them. But it don't. It just makes you responsible. I worked a case once. Young man, 20 years old, panicked with a gun. Shot a man who only went for bread. You know what I learned that night? The cadets leaned in. That the difference between life and death ain't always ours. Sometimes it's 60 seconds. 1 minute of fear. 1 minute of bad choice. That's all it takes to write a tragedy. The room went silent. The cadets scribbled notes. But Torres knew they wouldn't truly understand until they stood in his shoes, staring down the weight of other people's choices. And so the story lived on, not just in prison walls, not just in a widow's heart, not just in a detective's memory, but as a lesson passed forward. Because time moves on, but truth never expires. Parole. The parole board room was plain. Beige walls, a long table, 3 officials with tired eyes. Marcus Green sat before them, a man in his mid-30s now, shoulders broader, face older. Time in prison had carved him into someone far removed from the boy who once panicked in a Houston street. He spoke carefully, voice steady but low. I was 20 years old when I took a man's life. I didn't wake up that morning planning to. But that doesn't matter. Raymond Jefferson is gone because of me. His wife's been alone because of me. I've had 15 years to think about it. All I can say is, I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry that asks for freedom. The kind of sorry that knows it'll never be enough. The board scribbled notes. They had heard many apologies before. But sincerity is hard to fake. Across town, Clara Jefferson received a letter inviting her to the parole hearing. She sat at her kitchen table, the same one where Ray used to drink his coffee, staring at the envelope for hours. Her sister urged her to go. You deserve to tell them how this hurt you. But Clara shook her head. I've already told the world. My silence now says more than my words. He'll carry what he did with or without me sitting in that room. Instead, she walked to the cemetery that day. She laid fresh flowers on Ray's grave and whispered, they're talking about letting him out, baby. I don't know if I forgive him, but I know I forgive myself for still being here. Detective Torres, weeks away from retirement, heard about the hearing through old contacts. He didn't go, but he thought about it all day. That night, sitting on his porch with a glass of whiskey, he told his wife, cases fade from the papers, but not from your bones. I've carried Marcus Green and Ray Jefferson with me for 15 years. Parole or not, the lesson stays the same. Choices don't get erased. They just get remembered. His wife nodded, squeezing his hand. The parole board deliberated for over an hour. Finally, they returned. Mr. Green, the chairwoman said, This board acknowledges your remorse and your record of good behavior. However, due to the seriousness of your crime, parole is denied. You will be eligible again in 5 years. Marcus nodded slowly. He didn't argue, didn't plead, just whispered, "I understand." And in that moment, he truly did. Crossroads. The Houston Police Department held Torres's retirement ceremony on a warm Friday afternoon. The roll call room was packed with uniforms, old partners, and a few fresh-faced rookies who only knew him by reputation. Graves stood at the podium, speaking with the kind of respect that comes from years of walking crime scenes together. "Torres taught me something the Academy never did, that behind every case number is a family, a story, a wound. He carried them all, maybe too many. But because of him, this city is safer and a little wiser." Applause filled the room. Torres stood, his back a little stiff, his hair fully silver, and accepted his plaque. When it was his turn to speak, he cleared his throat and said, "I don't got a long speech. Just this. When you wear this badge, remember it ain't about you. It's about promises. Every case I worked started with a broken one. A promise to be home for dinner. A promise to stay out of trouble. A promise to be back in 10 minutes. And when those promises broke, we were left picking up the pieces." He paused, eyes wet but steady. "Don't forget the promises, kids. They matter more than the badge." That same week, Clara Jefferson sat at her kitchen table, her hands weaker now, her movement slower. But for the first time in years, she smiled as she brewed a cup of tea. A neighbor's little girl had left a basket of bread at her door that morning with a note, "For Miss Clara, so she never runs out." Clara laughed through her tears, holding the warm loaf to her chest. "Ray," she whispered, looking at her husband's photo on the wall. "The world still remembers. Maybe that's enough." Inside Huntsville prison, Marcus sat in the yard with the same tattered Bible in his lap. "Hey," younger inmate asked him once. "Oh gee, why you always reading that?" Marcus closed it softly. "'Cause I'm trying to learn how to live with what I can't take back." At night, he wrote letters he never mailed. Letters to Clara, to Torres, to the younger version of himself. In one he scrawled, "I walked out for trouble. He walked out for bread. One of us never came back." I've been living with that sentence ever since. He didn't know if parole would ever come, but he had learned this much, even behind bars. A man could try to build something better inside than what he destroyed outside. And so, 3 lives, bound by one night, reached their crossroads. A detective laying down his badge. A widow finding peace in small kindness. A prisoner learning the weight of truth. Because time does not erase tragedy, it only teaches us how to carry it. Legacies. Torres wasn't a man for sitting still. Retirement gave him too much quiet, too much time to think. So when the Academy asked if he'd come back as a guest instructor, he said yes. On his first day, a room full of cadets waited for him, their notepads open, their eyes expectant. He leaned against the podium, no notes in his hand, just the weight of years in his voice. "I'm not here to teach you tactics," he said. "Your instructors got that covered. I'm here to tell you about promises." There was a man once, Raymond Jefferson, walked out of his house one night in Houston to get a loaf of bread. Never came back, because a scared kid with a gun thought pulling the trigger was easier than facing his fear. The cadets shifted in their seats. Torres let the silence hang heavy before continuing. "Your job ain't just catching the guilty. It's remembering the innocent. Every call you answer, ask yourself, what promise just broke? And how do I keep another family from breaking too?" Some cadets scribbled fast. Others just stared. But the story stuck, the way stories always do. Clara Jefferson, her body slowing with age, found a new purpose. She started a small community program at the library called the Ray Jefferson Promise Fund. It offered after-school activities for neighborhood kids, teaching them reading, music, and mentorship. When asked why she started it, Clara said simply, "Because if one young man had a better choice that night, maybe my Ray would still be here. I can't bring him back, but maybe I can give someone else a better chance." The program grew. Parents brought their children. Volunteers donated time. And Clara, though fragile in body, carried herself like someone who had finally turned grief into light. In Huntsville, Marcus found a strange calling of his own. A prison chaplain asked him to speak to younger inmates, first-timers, scared kids barely out of high school. At first, Marcus resisted. What could he say that mattered? But one day, standing in front of 15 new inmates, he opened his mouth and said, "My name is Marcus Green. I'm here for murder. I was 20 when I pulled a trigger. Thought I was saving myself. Truth is, I just destroyed everything. A man went for bread, and I made sure. He never came back. I don't tell you this to scare you. I tell you because every bad choice feels small until it ain't. And once it's too late, it's too late." The room went quiet. Some of the kids looked away. Others stared at him with wide eyes. Marcus realized then he couldn't undo what he had done. But maybe he could stop someone else from walking the same path. 3 legacies, all born from one night. A detective teaching promises. A widow building futures. A prisoner warning others. All carrying forward the same truth. A single moment can echo for a lifetime. The last word. Years had passed. Houston grew taller, busier, louder, but the echoes of one night still whispered through its streets. Detective Torres, now fully retired, sat on his porch watching the sun sink low. He'd spent a lifetime chasing shadows, but the story that never left him wasn't the big drug busts or the headline murders. It was the night a man went for bread and never came back. Promises, he murmured to himself. That's all life is. Keeping M or breaking M. He closed his eyes and let the evening breeze remind him that some lessons outlive the badge. Clara Jefferson, her hair white and her steps slow, stood in the library surrounded by children. The Ray Jefferson Promise Fund had become a cornerstone of the neighborhood. A little boy asked her one day, "Miss Clara, why do you call it the Promise Fund?" She smiled, eyes soft with memory. "Because promises are what keep families whole. And sometimes, when one is broken, we have to build new ones together." The boy didn't fully understand, but he nodded, and Clara felt peace for the first time in decades. Marcus Green, now nearing 50, remained in prison. His parole had been denied twice. But he no longer counted years. He counted the lives he might save by telling the truth of his mistake. He spoke often to younger inmates, repeating the line that had become his burden and his testimony. "A man went for bread. I went for trouble. Only one of us never came back." He knew he would never undo it. But he also knew this. If even one boy left prison and never picked up a gun again, Ray Jefferson's death wouldn't be in vain. And so, 3 lives, bound forever by a single act of panic. Each carried forward a piece of the lesson. Torres left wisdom. Clara left hope. Marcus left warning. Together, their stories carved one truth into the stone of time. Backhand index pointing right. 1 minute of fear can destroy a lifetime of love. One broken promise can echo for generations. This is a life lesson brought out for you all, my fans. So, the next time you step out your door, whether it's for bread, for work, or just for a walk, remember this story. Remember Ray Jefferson. Remember that life is fragile, choices are heavy, and promises matter. If you find this story interesting, subscribe on the Pulse of Truth to see more life lesson like this. Stay active.